speeches stirred a generation. His marches outlined the way to economic freedom, and his message revealed a true democracy. On this day in 1968, Dr. King was murdered while standing on this very balcony at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Now known as the National Civil Rights Museum, this was the site 40 years ago where a man of inordinate courage and moral conviction lay sprawled on the ground. I'm Tiffany McElroy, and I welcome you to this special Justice, Equality, and Hope, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.
Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known.
What normally encompasses the civil rights era is a 14-year period from 1954 to 1968. The civil rights movement has to be understood as a grand coalition. There was a conservative wing and there was a more liberal wing. They all had different agendas, different strategies and programs, but there was one thing they all agreed on: Jim Crow must go.
Mongrel class of people. All races will be destroyed in such a movement. I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
For years, the black freedom struggle would be fought in the courts, but now with Brown versus Board of Education, the movement would transition from a legal environment to a social one, and a leader would have to be chosen.
There had been a concern within the Negro community of Montgomery about racial segregation on public buses. We need to find someone who can be a kind of a symbolic tester of the segregation ordinance, who was above reproach. Rosa Parks was perfect.
It was Rosa Parks' case that was chosen to begin the movement, and a young man named Martin Luther King Jr. was appointed the leader.
Just the other day, one of the finest citizens in Montgomery was taken from a bus and carried to jail and arrested because she refused to get up to give her seat to a white person.
King was chosen to be the spokesperson precisely because he was the weakest minister. He was the minister with the least influence. He was the minister who was the youngest. And he was also the minister, if something went wrong, that he could always get a job with his father back in Atlanta. And so it was not because he was the most dominating minister, it was because he was the weakest.
That was the day that we started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation. And that was the day when we decided that we were not going to take segregated buses any longer.
After the boycott occurred for 384 days, the Supreme Court decided by a vote of 9-0 that segregated public transportation was unconstitutional. So there was a legal victory that ended the boycott, and King became a superstar throughout the world.
And the Negro citizens of Montgomery are urged to return to the buses tomorrow morning on a non-segregated basis.
Martin had the intellectual ability, he had the oratorical ability, he had the ethnographic understanding of rural black Southern culture that allowed him to communicate with the masses of working class and poor African Americans. And for all of these kinds of reasons, Martin was the perfect person at this very, very narrow moment in political history in America. And he played the role quite well, even though he felt always that he was not up to the task. He always felt a deep degree of ambivalence about it.
It was this intangible part of his personality that would later on enable him to be a galvanizing force in ending racial segregation. Please stay with us.